The CNN studio lights shone brightly as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat calmly in her chair, her red blazer standing out against the blue backdrop. Across from her, legendary Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz leaned forward, his face tense with anger. The debate on presidential immunity had been heated, but what happened next shocked everyone watching. Congresswoman Crockett, Dershowitz said, his voice dripping with condescension, "Your understanding of constitutional law is embarrassingly basic. Frankly, I wonder what law school gave you a degree, because they clearly failed to teach you the fundamentals of presidential powers." The studio fell silent. The host's eyes widened. For a moment, Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch. Then a slight smile formed at the corner of her mouth. She reached down, grabbed her briefcase, and pulled out a document that Dershowitz couldn't see. "Professor," she said calmly, "I was hoping you'd go there." She held up the paper. "What I have here might make you regret those words for the rest of your career." What happened in the next 5 minutes left Dershowitz speechless, the host stunned, and legal experts across America texting each other in disbelief. This wasn't just a political argument. This was the moment Jasmine Crockett changed the national conversation about who gets to be called an expert in America. Before diving deeper into this incredible showdown, take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss moments like these when powerful figures are held accountable live on air. Alan Dershowitz had been a fixture in American legal circles for over 50 years. At 85, the former Harvard law professor had represented everyone from O.J. Simpson to Donald Trump. His books lined law school libraries, his opinions had shaped legal thought for generations. When Dershowitz spoke, people listened not because they always agreed, but because his credentials demanded respect. Tonight, he appeared on CNN's special legal panel to discuss presidential immunity, a topic where his controversial views had made headlines. Wearing his signature glasses and a navy suit, he projected the confidence of someone who had never had his expertise questioned. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, a rising star in Democratic politics. Before entering Congress, Crockett had built a reputation as a civil rights attorney in Texas, representing clients in high-profile police brutality cases. With degrees from both Rhodes College and the University of Houston Law Center, she had practiced law for over 15 years before entering politics. The tension between them had been building for weeks. On previous shows, Dershowitz had dismissed Crockett's legal arguments without addressing their substance. He had interrupted her repeatedly, referring to her as Congresswoman rather than attorney, Crockett. A subtle but clear attempt to diminish her legal credentials. For viewers, this wasn't just about a legal disagreement. This was about who gets to claim expertise in America's most important conversations. It was about an old guard trying to maintain control and a new generation demanding their seat at the table. The host, Michael Santiago, a veteran CNN journalist known for letting debates unfold, introduced the segment. Tonight we're discussing the Supreme Court's upcoming ruling on presidential immunity, a case with profound implications for our democracy. Professor Dershowitz, you've written extensively that presidents should have broad immunity. Congresswoman Crockett, you've argued for stricter limitations. Professor, let's start with you. Dershowitz straightened his tie, ready to deliver his well-rehearsed opening statement, unaware that this night would become one of the most challenging of his long career. The Constitution grants the president unique powers as the chief executive. Without broad immunity, a president cannot effectively govern. Every decision would be paralyzed by fear of prosecution from political opponents. Dershowitz began with his familiar argument. Crockett waited patiently, jotting notes as Dershowitz spoke. When her turn came, she responded methodically. While I respect Professor Dershowitz's long career, I must disagree. The Constitution establishes that no one is above the law. Complete immunity would effectively create an American king, exactly what the founders fought against. Dershowitz's face tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged so directly. Congressman, with all due respect, you're confusing immunity from prosecution with being above the law. They're legally distinct concepts. This is basic constitutional theory. I'm not confused at all, Professor, Crockett replied evenly. I'm quite familiar with the distinction. My point is that functional immunity must have limits, particularly for actions taken outside official duties. The host interjected, "Professor Dershowitz, you've previously argued that a president could have immunity even for actions that might benefit them personally. Could you elaborate?" Dershowitz shifted forward. "Of course. If a president believes their re-election is in the national interest, actions taken toward that goal could fall under official duties. It's a complex legal area, but one I've published on extensively." Crockett shook her head slightly. "That's an extraordinary claim that essentially nullifies accountability. Under that theory, a president could direct the Justice Department to arrest political opponents and claim immunity." "That's a ridiculous exaggeration," Dershowitz snapped, color rising in his face. "No serious legal scholar would interpret my position that way." "Actually," Crockett countered, "many serious scholars have criticized exactly that implication in your writing. I can cite several law review articles published in the last year alone." The host, sensing the tension rising, tried to redirect. "Let's talk about the specific case before the Supreme Court. Professor, what's your prediction for the ruling?" But Dershowitz wasn't ready to move on. He turned directly to Crockett, his voice hardening. "Congresswoman, I've taught constitutional law at Harvard for 5 decades. I've argued before the Supreme Court 17 times. With all due respect to your political career, I think I understand the nuances of presidential immunity better than someone who spent a few years as a local attorney." A flash of something, not anger, but determination, crossed Crockett's face. "Professor, my few years include representing clients before the Supreme Court as well. But more importantly, legal expertise isn't measured solely by years at Harvard. Different perspectives strengthen our legal system." Dershowitz's laugh was short and dismissive. "Perspective is valuable in politics, Congresswoman. In constitutional law, there's established precedent and theory. It's not a matter of opinion. Law is always evolving, Professor. That's why we have new precedents, new interpretations. Even the originalists on the court recognize that understanding changes." The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators exchanged glances. The producer spoke urgently in the host's earpiece, advising him to go to commercial, but Santiago ignored the suggestion. This was compelling television. Dershowitz leaned forward, removing his glasses. "Let me be direct, Congresswoman. You're a politician now, not a practicing attorney. Your role is to represent your constituents, not to lecture on constitutional law, especially not to someone who literally wrote the textbook many law students still use." The control room fell silent. The line had been crossed from heated debate to personal attack. The host opened his mouth to intervene, but Crockett raised her hand slightly, indicating she wanted to respond. "Professor," she said, her voice measured but firm, "you keep referencing your Harvard position as if it's the ultimate authority. Many fine legal minds never taught at Harvard, including, I might add, several Supreme Court justices." Dershowitz's face reddened. "I'm not claiming Harvard is the only credential that matters. I'm simply stating that decades of specialized experience count for something in this discussion." "They absolutely do," Crockett agreed. "Just as actual courtroom experience counts." "When was the last time you personally represented a client in trial court, Professor?" The question hung in the air. Dershowitz hadn't tried a case at the trial level in years, focusing instead on appeals, consulting, and commentary. Before he could respond, Crockett continued. "Experience matters in different ways. My experience representing everyday Americans facing a system stacked against them offers insights you might not have from your position of privilege." That word privilege visibly triggered Dershowitz. He straightened in his chair, finger pointing. "Don't lecture me about privilege, Congresswoman. I earned everything through hard work and scholarship. I wasn't handed anything because of identity politics." The studio went completely still. The implication in his statement was clear to everyone watching. The host looked alarmed, knowing the conversation had veered into dangerous territory. Crockett's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a new edge. "Professor Dershowitz, are you suggesting my career advances came from identity politics rather than merit?" "I'm saying that in today's political climate, certain backgrounds are elevated regardless of qualifications." That's just reality. Crockett nodded slowly, as if Dershowitz had finally confirmed something she'd long suspected. As I see, and my law degree, my years practicing, my case record, all of that is secondary to what you perceive as demographic advantages? Congresswoman, I didn't say that specifically about you. But you implied it, Professor. Let's be clear about what's happening here. You're questioning my legal credentials because I disagree with you. That's not scholarship. That's arrogance. Dershowitz's face flushed deeper. The conversation had slipped entirely from his control. Your credentials? Fine. Where did you get your law degree again? Houston? A fine regional school, I'm sure, but hardly... And that's when Crockett reached for a briefcase. Professor, Crockett said calmly as she retrieved a folder, I was hoping you'd go there. Her composure was striking compared to Dershowitz's visible agitation. The studio lights seemed to brighten as she opened the folder. You've made it clear this isn't about constitutional interpretation for you. It's about credentials, about who has the right to speak on these issues. So let's talk about credentials. She pulled out a document and laid it on the table between them. This is my complete legal resume. 15 years practicing law before entering Congress, over 200 cases tried, 7 appearances before appellate courts, 2 before the Supreme Court, a 92% success rate. Dershowitz glanced at the paper, but didn't pick it up. An impressive career in local Texas courts, I'm sure, but we're discussing complex constitutional theory. I'm not finished, Professor, Crockett said, her voice firmer now. She pulled out another document. This is the amicus brief I authored in Martinez v. Texas, which the Supreme Court cited directly in their ruling. Justice Kagan called it particularly illuminating on questions of executive authority. Dershowitz shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't been aware of her work on that case. And this, Crockett continued, producing another paper, is a peer-reviewed article I published in the Columbia Law Review on the limits of executive privilege, a topic directly relevant to our discussion tonight. The host, Michael Santiago, leaned forward with interest. Congresswoman, I wasn't aware you had published in the Columbia Law Review. Yes, and the Harvard Law Review as well, she replied, sliding another document forward. This piece from 3 years ago examining the historical precedents of presidential immunity. Dershowitz stared at the Harvard Law Review article with visible surprise. Publishing in his own institution's prestigious journal was no small achievement. But since Professor Dershowitz seems particularly concerned about my education, Crockett continued, let me address that directly. She pulled out one final document and placed it deliberately in front of Dershowitz. This is my academic record from the University of Houston Law Center, where I graduated summa cum laude in the top 2% of my class. Below that is my score on the Texas bar exam, which was in the top 1% that year. The camera zoomed in on Dershowitz's face as he glanced at the document. His expression shifted subtly, a mixture of surprise and the dawning realization that he had severely underestimated his opponent. And finally, Crockett said, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping, this is from the Harvard Crimson, dated 2017. It's an article about guest lecturers in constitutional law that semester. You might notice a familiar name among them. The host leaned over to look. Is that you, Congresswoman? Yes, she said simply. I was invited by Professor Lawrence Tribe to guest lecture at Harvard Law on civil rights litigation. Professor Dershowitz and I were actually on campus the same week, though we never met. The studio fell silent. The revelation that Crockett had lectured at Harvard Law, Dershowitz's home turf, changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. It wasn't just that she had impressive credentials. It was that she had them in the very spaces Dershowitz had used to dismiss her. Dershowitz cleared his throat. I wasn't aware of your guest lecture. Lawrence is a distinguished colleague, though we often disagree. That's the point, Professor, Crockett replied. Distinguished legal minds can disagree without questioning each other's fundamental qualifications or right to participate in the conversation. She gathered her documents and returned them to her folder. I didn't bring these out to brag about my resume. I brought them because you left me no choice but to defend my right to sit at this table as your equal in this discussion. The host, recognizing the powerful television moment unfolding, asked, Professor Dershowitz, would you like to respond? Dershowitz, now visibly uncomfortable, attempted to recover. I never suggested Congresswoman Crockett isn't accomplished. I simply emphasize that in constitutional matters, specialized experience— Let me stop you there, Professor, Crockett interrupted, her voice now carrying a quiet authority that commanded the room. This isn't just about me. This is about a pattern I've observed throughout my career, and tonight on this show. She turned slightly to address the camera directly. There are brilliant legal minds across America who didn't attend the most prestigious schools, who didn't teach at Harvard, who didn't represent celebrity clients, and yet their understanding of the law, their contributions to jurisprudence, are no less valuable. She turned back to Dershowitz. When you dismissed my legal education without knowing anything about my performance there, when you suggested my career advancements came from identity politics rather than merit, you weren't just insulting me. You were revealing a blindness to excellence that doesn't fit your narrow definition. Dershowitz's attempt to interject was stopped by Crockett's raised hand. The law doesn't belong exclusively to Harvard, Professor. It belongs to all Americans, and its interpretation isn't the sole province of those who've walked through certain ivy-covered gates. The control room was completely silent. Producers who had been ready to cut to commercial were now transfixed. They knew they were witnessing something remarkable, not just a political argument, but a profound moment of accountability. Dershowitz, a man accustomed to controlling every conversation, found himself speechless. His usual rhetorical flourishes and appeals to authority had been systematically dismantled, not with anger or matching condescension, but with calm, irrefutable evidence. I've admired your work for many years, Professor, Crockett said, her tone softening slightly. Your defense of civil liberties, your early writings on the First Amendment, these made a significant impact on my own legal thinking, which is why your dismissal of my credentials tonight is so disappointing. The personal note, acknowledging Dershowitz's contributions while holding him accountable, struck a powerful chord. It wasn't just that she had defended herself, she had done so with a grace that highlighted the pettiness of his attack. The host, sensing a moment to transition, said, "We need to take a quick break, but when we return, I'd like to get back to the actual legal question of presidential immunity, and perhaps we can model a more productive form of disagreement." He looked pointedly at Dershowitz as the camera pulled back for the commercial break. As the on-air light went off, Dershowitz sat motionless, staring at the Harvard Crimson article still on the table between them. For perhaps the first time in his long career, the famous professor had been rendered completely speechless on national television. The break ended, and when they returned, viewers noticed an immediate difference in Dershowitz's demeanor. Dershowitz held up his hands. "Oh, sorry." Gone was the dismissive tone, the interruptions. Instead, he addressed Crockett as counselor, a term of professional respect among attorneys, and engaged with her arguments rather than attacking her right to make them. The conversation turned substantive, with both offering nuanced perspectives on the limits of presidential power. Their disagreements remained, but the nature of the exchange had fundamentally changed. Viewers weren't watching a dismissal, they were watching a debate between equals. As the segment concluded, Dershowitz did something rare for him. He conceded a point. Counselor Crockett raises a valid concern about the potential for abuse under too broad an immunity doctrine. While I still believe presidents need protection to govern effectively, her point about actions clearly outside official duties is well taken. Crockett nodded in acknowledgement, and I appreciate Professor Dershowitz's expertise on the historical development of immunity doctrines. There's value in understanding how these concepts evolved, even as we debate their proper limits. The host, seeing this unexpected moment of professional respect, concluded, "Thank you both. This conversation demonstrates that even the most passionate legal disagreements can ultimately be conducted with mutual respect for expertise and experience." As the segment ended, social media was already exploding with clips of Crockett's methodical, powerful response. Legal experts were texting each other in amazement. The narrative wasn't just that she had stood her ground, it was that she had transformed what could have been an ugly confrontation into a masterclass on responding to professional disrespect. The CNN segment had barely ended when the first clips hit Twitter. Within minutes, Crockett credentials began trending nationwide. The moment resonated far beyond the specific legal argument about presidential immunity. It touched a nerve about elitism, respect, and who gets to claim expertise in America. Legal professors shared the clip with their students. Watch this masterclass in maintaining your dignity while firmly establishing your place at the table, wrote a Yale law professor to her first-year students. The American Bar Association's social media account reposted the exchange with the caption, "Professionalism in the face of disrespect." By morning, mainstream news outlets had picked up the story. The Washington Post ran an analysis piece titled, "The Harvard Card: When Credentials Become Weapons." The New York Times featured an op-ed from a prominent black female attorney about her similar experiences in legal settings. CNN's ratings for the segment were their highest in months, prompting them to schedule a follow-up panel. Jasmine Crockett's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she left the studio. Law schools from across the country sent speaking invitations. 3 prestigious law journals requested articles on executive privilege. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a statement praising her dignity and brilliance in the face of disrespect. Most surprising was the call from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor's office, inviting her to speak at an upcoming judicial conference on civil discourse and legal debates. "Your handling of that situation exemplified the best traditions of the bar," the justice's clerk told her. For Crockett, the attention was validating, but not the point. In an interview the next morning on CBS, she explained, "This wasn't about me or my resume. It was about challenging the assumption that only certain voices deserve to be part of our most important legal conversations." When asked if she thought Dershowitz's comments had racial or gender undertones, she was measured. "I can't speak to his intentions. What I can say is that women and people of color in the legal profession often face heightened scrutiny of their credentials. We're presumed less qualified until proven otherwise." That's the context in which that exchange occurred. Alan Dershowitz, meanwhile, faced an unexpected backlash. Former students and colleagues publicly criticized his behavior. The Harvard Law School dean issued a carefully worded statement affirming the school's commitment to recognizing excellence regardless of background. Scheduled television appearances were suddenly postponed. 2 days after the CNN segment, Dershowitz did something rare. He issued a public statement acknowledging he had been wrong. "Upon reflection, my comments to Congresswoman Crockett were inappropriate and failed to acknowledge her significant legal accomplishments. While we may continue to disagree on constitutional interpretation, I regret questioning her qualifications rather than engaging with her arguments. This incident has prompted me to reflect on assumptions I may have carried throughout my career." Legal experts noted that for Dershowitz, a man famous for rarely admitting error, this statement represented a significant moment. Harvard law professor Noah Feldman commented, "Alan has built a career on never backing down. This acknowledgement, however brief, signals the impact of Crockett's response. Beyond the personal drama, the exchange sparked broader conversations about credentialism in American professional life. Op-eds appeared discussing the hidden curriculum of elite institutions and the often unacknowledged excellence in state schools, historically black colleges and universities, and non-traditional educational paths. The Texas Southern University Law School, a historically black institution with a distinguished civil rights litigation program, saw applications spike in the weeks following the exchange. The dean attributed this directly to Crockett, challenging assumptions about where legal excellence is cultivated. CNN's ratings success with the segment led them to announce a new series called Beyond Credentials, exploring unconventional paths to expertise in various fields. Their first episode would feature attorneys from non-elite schools who had argued before the Supreme Court. A month after the exchange, Crockett was invited to deliver the commencement address at her alma mater, the University of Houston Law Center, ending before graduating students, many from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in law. She reflected on the incident that had unexpectedly amplified her voice. The law is not the exclusive property of any institution, no matter how prestigious. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who studies it diligently, practices it ethically, and uses it to pursue justice. Never let anyone convince you that your path to legal expertise is less valuable because it didn't pass through certain gates. The speech went viral, shared by law students across the country who saw in Crockett's words an affirmation of their own potential impact, regardless of their school's ranking. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome came 6 months later, when Alan Dershowitz reached out to Crockett with a proposal: a co-taught online course on constitutional interpretation, bringing together their different perspectives and experiences. Our disagreement, however uncomfortable in the moment, highlighted the value of diverse viewpoints in constitutional analysis, he wrote. Crockett agreed, with one condition: that the course be made freely available to law students from all backgrounds, not just elite institutions. Dershowitz accepted. Their first session drew over 10,000 virtual attendees from law schools across America, from Harvard and Yale to community law programs and night schools. Students witnessed two legal minds with fundamentally different approaches finding common ground in their commitment to constitutional principles, even as they continued to disagree on interpretations. In legal circles, the Dershowitz-Crockett moment became shorthand for a turning point in professional discourse when challenging someone's right to participate in the conversation became less acceptable than engaging with their actual arguments. And for Jasmine Crockett, the incident reinforced a truth she had always believed: that excellence in law, as in all fields, takes many forms and follows many paths. Her willingness to stand her ground that night didn't just defend her own credentials, it created space for countless others whose expertise had been similarly dismissed. As one first-year law student from a small state school wrote to her, "Watching you that night showed me that I don't need to apologize for my path. My understanding of the law isn't determined by my school's prestige, but by the depth of my study and the integrity of my practice." This, more than any trending hashtag or viral clip, was the true impact of that electric moment when Jasmine Crockett transformed an insult into an opportunity to challenge who gets to claim expertise in America's most important conversations. If you found this breakdown of the Dershowitz-Crockett confrontation valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Our channel brings you the most powerful moments in political and legal debates, analyzed for maximum understanding. Comment below with your thoughts on who had the better legal argument about presidential immunity, and share this video to keep the conversation going.